Welcome to the Rabia and Sana show. We're two Desi girls reinventing cultural norms with love to make difficult conversations easier to help you take courageous steps faster.
Whether you feel like a misfit now or have been breaking the standards, this podcast is for you, for the adults, the young. Come as you be and become your authentic self as you desire. Let's go reinvent some cultural norms together.
Hello everyone, I am Rabia Paracha. I have been a rebel without a cause for most of my life until I discovered my purpose to empower women to empower themselves. And that led me down a rabbit hole to become a life coach from CTI Coactive Coaching. And today I'm a mind and life power coach who helps people break free of their limiting cultural beliefs to find the life they love and the love of their life.
Hello everyone, I am Sana. I am from New Jersey, a Pakistani. Professionally, I work in the clinical research field. And personally, I have always had this purpose of empowering women of South Asian culture to be able to live the life that they want to live and be true to themselves instead of what the culture expects them to be. And so here I am pursuing that purpose, and I am also studying to become a life coach. Let's get started.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 2. Today we are going to be talking about how do we know that we need to reinvent cultural norms.
Yes, I'm so excited about this topic, Rabia. A great start to getting to the root of the...
We always know something's not working and we don't know what to do or even how to address it. And so how do we know what to do when it's not going right in our lives? And what a difficult question it is to answer or even to think about, because it requires us to really get honest and admit to things. And it's not easy. Like, it takes time, it takes a lot of courage, and it's practice as well. So
it's really hard. And we talked about why important to reinvent cultural norms and why do the changes that you want to do yourself. But really, I think where it starts, how know that you need to do, right? And so that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. And not so much we can't know how before we actually do things, but we do know, like we've defined previously in the first episode, is that we've got to know our why it's there in the first place. Is this a figment of my imagination where we gaslight ourselves, or is this something actually happening and there is a consequence and it's impacting my self-worth, it's impacting my confidence, it's impacting my health? So knowing that if these signals are there, if I feel sad and lonely and depressed all the time because it's constantly happening, something is constantly happening, and I just can't pinpoint what that constantly happening is. That was my case. Something was wrong, didn't know what it was. Now there are terms for all the things that I felt, but at the time it was so normal because everyone does it.
So it's really just like a feeling of uneasiness, or like the way you're saying is you kind of knew, but it just didn't feel right. So like that uneasiness, that uncomfortable feeling, the feeling in your gut that something is not right, something is wrong. So it's really about being real with yourself on how you are feeling and recognizing that feeling that you have, that uneasiness, recognizing it, identifying it, being, I guess it's a conversation with self, right?
Totally. And so why and how we're sort of brought in, but what is going on? It's a big word. So why is really getting to the heart of the matter. Why is it happening? And why do I want to change? So there are two whys that we can ask ourselves. Why is it happening and why do we want the change? And then what is going on? So if we know what is going on, then we can learn about it and find out the how.
Yeah, I feel like the whys and the what answer the how. If you know what the problem is, what that feeling is feeling, and if you know why you are feeling that feeling, then there you go. There's your how that you need to know.
Why it's happening, and then within myself, why it's happening as the foundation of the cultural norm that we discussed. Is it a belief system barrier? Is it a folk way? Is it a tradition that we don't want to let go of? Is it a taboo that we're afraid to talk about?
Yeah.
So just tying it all together, is it a problem in the culture? or is it a problem that I am actually experiencing that I need to seek help, or I need to remove myself from that situation, whether it be with our families, whether it be with our partners, whether it be with our children or extended families. What do I need to do to make my health better, to make my sanity better, to make my self-image better? Because if you're constantly in that environment, toxic environment, I would add,
Yeah.
because a lot of the toxic behaviors are very normal in our culture.
Yeah. So I was just thinking as you were talking, taking a step back, that first conversation with self, that realization, it's not easy at all because we don't talk to ourselves. That's something that in our culture we ignore. We ignore so much. That gut feeling of something is wrong, that could be many different things. That could be that I'm not a good person. I need to go pray more, or I need to do my duties better, obligations better. That internal conversation and that addressing that uneasiness feeling.
Yes. So just want to clarify that we always bring it back. Oh, there's something is wrong with me. They're saying this about me, and they're validating the negative self-talk that we have about ourselves. And something wrong is not about something wrong with you, something wrong with anything. I think the key thing that we have to ask is this working?
Yes.
I don't like making things right and wrong because there's a judgment there but something isn't feeling right. Something's wrong in that something isn't feeling right. And how do I communicate?
We don't say that to ourselves, that something isn't right.
Yes. It's a learned behavior, or it's a learned quality that we can all learn.
Yes.
We can all practice, because learning is through practice. Exactly. If we don't do something, how do we know what to do? But it's like going to the gym. First day you go, you can only lift 2 pounds. And then the third day you're lifting 5 pounds. So it's practicing this muscle of communicating, or of developing a practice that helps us reflect and introspect and actually analyze what is working, what isn't working. But then it's all triggered by that feeling, something's off here.
Yeah, something's off here. And it could be situations around us too that we can start to recognize and realize that these situations around us are not right. Like getting treated in different ways. These are symptoms that you can notice, and you start to see that they are not right. Because we ignore them too. We ignore all this. We see people, not respect or not what a relationship should be like. So like silent treatment in a relationship, holding grudges, judging, passive aggressive type of behavior. We ignore it.
So let's go into these a little bit, these behaviors. There's toxic positivity, there's stonewalling, which is the silent treatment, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, that somebody's constantly putting you down. And then there is gaslighting, that, oh, that didn't really happen. This is how it happened. And people just wash over your lived reality, your lived truth. It's not so much that these things happen, because in the course of our day-to-day lives, we do some of these things, but it's when something is usually off, or something's not working or wrong, it's usually very frequent. So it's not once a month, 5 times a day, or 10 times a day. Most of us work and we have lives that we spend away from our family members. And when we come together in that 4 or 5 hours, how frequently is it happening? And how much are we thinking about it? So that's another symptom. Am I constantly thinking, I feel so bad, or I can't believe that person did that to me, and we're having negative thoughts about people. That's SOB,
Or negative thoughts about yourself. Like, am I not good enough? Am I not worthy enough? Maybe something's wrong with me. Why am I feeling like this? Maybe I need to go change, or maybe I need to do even better.
Yes. And I think that making that decision to become honest about our problems and stop sweeping them under the rug, that they will get better, that things will change without me doing anything. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that is really how we make problems grow.
And I certainly did so much of that. I expected different results every time, or I thought maybe I do better to get different results. But that is not the case, because I was still doing the same type of thing over and over, just a little bit differently. So same type of action on my side, but a different way of doing it and expecting different results. And of course, it didn't happen.
Yeah. And also, change doesn't happen from one side. One person can't go all the way to meet someone else's needs.
Yeah.
It's like you are depleting yourself in the process. That in our culture, as we know, that women get married younger than men. So they're at a very impressionable age, so that the husbands can mold the woman to be the perfect wife for them. It's an uneven distribution or attention to the needs of two people. It's about the needs of one person. I know someone who said to me, there's God and then there's my husband. It's called the God syndrome, and that's another narcissistic behavior that we're enabling. So our culture enables a lot of narcissistic and toxic behaviors because of the role that's given to men.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, this is harmful for both people. This is not just about me saying, oh, men are bad. That's not what I'm saying. I really want to make this point that this is not a healthy behavior for the person doing it because they don't know better. And this is not an healthy behavior as the recipient of that behavior, but also the person that constantly enables and makes matters worse over time. So that does happen.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I agree completely. And I think enabling that narcissistic behavior for that one role and the other role, enabling that behavior as a result of the narcissism. So you have to, put yourself down and have a low self-image, low self-worth and things to compensate for that narcissistic behavior. And I think if there's somebody who can take advantage of this behavior that the culture enables, right? People can take advantage of that. So use it against the other person. And that happens all the time.
But here's the other thing. It's unconscious. We don't even know that we're doing it because it's so deeply ingrained in us because of what we've seen. A lot of our thinking and behaviors are not conscious. It's unconscious. So these are things that we don't even know we're doing it until we put on that hat and say, where am I the part of the problem? I think it, like you're saying, self-reflection and introspection. And this is something that I did. What I did was, where am I doing this? So in order for me to change something on the outside, I have to see where it exists on the inside.
That's the key. That's where it starts.
So where am I the narcissist? Where am I the racist? Where am I the gaslighter? Where am I the toxic positivity person? Because I was the most positive person on the planet. And I would always constantly reframe, oh, look at the bright side. Or things can be so much worse.
Me too.
So when we say these things, we diminish the human experience of feeling sad, of feeling hurt. And we flip the switch from a negative to a positive without actually being human and experiencing those emotions. And in this self-reflection part, what we can do is we can actually go into this made me sad. But when you're doing it deliberately and consciously, you don't have to stay there a long time. You can feel it for a moment. Emotions actually last at a time 90 seconds. And so we have a lot of tools and skills that we can actually, I'm sure we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth later, but just wanted to bring that to the table because
so starting with the decision to be honest with yourself, having these conversations, why am I feeling like this? What exactly is this feeling? What is it bothering me? And why am I feeling like this? What are these thoughts? That's what you're saying. When you do it intentionally, know of these thoughts. And that's crazy. That really doesn't take that long to do that with yourself. It's just a few minutes and a few seconds of that feeling that will come and go. But the ignoring, stop being ignorant. I feel like that's a big thing in our culture too. Being ignorant is not knowing, that you have a choice or that the choice is there to not feel like that.
It's hard though, because we don't always have the support structure, and to do things alone and it's one against the world in my little world, it's hard. And I think another question that you are saying is that, that ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, you can get away with everything. But when you don't call it out as well, you allow it to get away. And one question I want to ask you, if you want to answer, and to everyone listening, is what's your limit? How much more can you take? And in fact, it's more than one question. And one more question. What are the implications or what are the consequences of this behavior, of this situation, if it continues for another month, another year, another decade? What are the consequences?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that threshold for patience and that threshold for how much can you take. First, I used to think that, it varies from person to person. Everyone has like a personal type of a stamina where they just can take so much, and they just, some people just can't take so much. But I think that the more you have feelings of obligations, the more you have the feeling of sacrifice, the more you feel shame, embarrassment, guilty, all of that, and you will compensate for that, and the threshold will just get higher and higher and higher. I guess that's what we can call it, or ignoring the problem, not looking inwards and just dealing with it. It's all of those things, and the more you feel those things, the higher your threshold.
For sure, because we want to be loved and we want to be validated and we want to be accepted. So we start saying things and becoming people pleasers to receive the love that we so desire, but in the same time, we're chipping away at ourselves. We're chipping away at our truth. We're chipping away at our self-confidence, at our self-worth, at our self-respect.
Yeah.
A lot of these behaviors are about self-respect. And so when I decided that I am going to change things, I said that there's one boundary for everyone, whether they be my loved ones or whether they be strangers. They treat me must be the same, because I had established my self-respect line.
Did you do that as you were doing the change, or did it take time for you to understand that?
That was the very first decision I took. See, I recommend and highly encourage to take the difficult steps first. Do the hard things first.
Yeah.
If you want change, start questioning the most difficult problem in your life, because what the trickle effect of fixing difficult problems is, a lot of the small problems get fixed as well. Whereas if you start with the small problems, it actually is the same thing, but you still start with the small problem, but this is why I'm doing this, and this is one of the problems, not the problem. So I just created a boundary. I said, this is how my children are going to treat me. This is how my family is going to treat me. This is how strangers are going to treat me. This is how my friends are going to treat me. And when I did that, of course, some people were easy to fix because they weren't important to me. And they didn't add value. There wasn't enough love. There wasn't enough substance to make that relationship work. But then there were some people that took decades, and I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
It takes forever. But those relationships are so meaningful and important. You want to put in the time. You want to make the effort.
I understand. I mean, that's really good for you, Rabia, that you realized that sooner on, and that's what you did at first. It took me a long time to realize that I have to set up the boundaries around me, because I was trying to make people understand that the problem, I was still looking for that justification that they need to understand, I need to be validated, that my change is validated, that my change needs to happen. But that makes me think of a question you asked if how much should your patience or threshold be. I would ask, how bad does it have to be in order to make that change? How bad does it have to get to look inwards? How bad does it have to be? Does it have to get to the physical abuse part? Does it have to get to a part where where you're suicidal? Or does it have to be that bad to realize that we need to make a change?
Yeah, it's hard. When you get to the other side, you can ask these questions a lot easier and say, why didn't I do it sooner? Why didn't I do it 10 years ago? Why didn't I do it? That's regret, right? That's regret. We're creating that same problem again by being hard on ourselves. So there is no right and wrong time. There is, whenever you take that decision is the right time. And so key is not to look back. Oh, why didn't I? Oh, why didn't I? There's remorse and regret. The better question is, I could have, but I'm choosing to do it now.
Yeah.
And pat yourself on the back in this process. And I think that when you're saying that these why questions, and it took you a long time and you're creating these boundaries, but of self-respect and self-worth, the first thing to do is actually, how am I respecting myself? How many times do I validate myself? How many times am I nice to myself?
Compassion to yourself.
When you start doing it for yourself and to yourself, that boundary, you determine that boundary not by the expectation of what others give to you, but how much you give to yourself. So we have to meet that boundary. We have to come up and people have to come towards us. That's how we meet in the middle.
Yeah. Once you start doing it with yourself, sometimes it automatically will happen from the outside too with other people, because you will expect that because you know it within yourself, and you will be expecting the same type of compassion from others.
Yes. And I started with conversations with myself. I asked myself, what do I want from my mom? What do I want from my brother? What do I want from my ex-husband? What did I want? And what wasn't being met? And so I looked in the mirror, and everything I wanted, I started giving to myself through communication, looking at myself in the eyes and saying, Rabia, I love you. Or you're worthy of everything you want. You're smart, you're intelligent. Because, when some people tell you, you're stupid all the time, or that you're fat all the time, because I used to get called fat, so I was a chubby kid, and I used to get fat, and so that hurt. But we don't realize it's hurting. The person doing it, they're also kids.
Yeah. And you're right. We do that to ourselves then. If we hear it from around us, we do it to ourselves. And that's like such a key right there that you said. We talk to ourselves nicely. We recognize our flaws. We are compassionate to ourselves. We accept ourselves the way we are. We talk to ourselves about these problems, identify the problems within ourselves, and it'll all just start to happen from the outside too, because then we will expect others to be the same.
Attracted.
Yeah.
Like we are worthy. We show up as our true self, our worth. So our self-worth is no longer determined by how others see us.
Yeah.
And we just establish a sense of self.
Yeah.
It's rooted in our values.
Yeah. And that enabled me, once I started doing that enabled me to have better communication with others then. And that's how I think the next step, it naturally starts to happen, is that when you expect it from others, the same treatment, you're going to start to communicate. It's reminding me of our conversation from Friday night, the way you talked to me and you told me the way I made you feel with whatever I said. And that's communication, and we don't do that in our culture.
Yeah. And so I want to break down communication too. Communication is talking and conveying a message, but it's rooted in self-expression. Self-expression and communicating, not to make someone feel what they did was wrong, but speaking from the I, this is how I felt.
Yeah.
The I statement. I have a friend, Dr. Sujata, that has been so amazing. And I know she's going to be a guest on our show in the near future, which I'm looking forward to. And she's amazing. And, having that I statement of I felt this way and this is what I felt. Like explaining it without saying, and this, I was disappointed or I was hurt. Having these statements and knowing how to say them. Initially, I have to say it sounds very mechanical.
Yeah.
Because we haven't done it. But I promise you, every time it becomes more natural, because the parts of ourselves that we're disconnected from, we start connecting to them.
Yeah.
Start connecting to them, and we start linking ourselves, and we feel, wow, I feel so empowered that I said that. And then the next time it's a little bit easier. Oh, I felt even more empowered that I could express myself and how I felt, meaning it's practice. It'll come out wrong, but at the same time, it'll get better over time.
It will. And that first step is so hard. And you're right. Like even doing this podcast for me, it was so hard just to start talking in the beginning. But now I'm starting to feel comfortable. Now I feel better. So you got to do that hard thing. It feels weird. It's so hard, but I knew it's right, And so you just got to do it. And there's just no other way. It's hard. It's going to start to get better. It's going to start to get comfortable.
Right. So do the hard thing first. And the hardest thing is to decide what you want, why you want it, and then the how is really connecting with yourself through that decision to be honest with yourself. And because you're worth it, you're worthy, you're a human being who deserves respect. And then, okay, let me create my boundary first.
Communicate. Yeah.
Here's another how. I can start pouring into myself what I want from others.
Yeah, talking to yourself the way you want others to talk to you, writing down the things that you want to have others say to you, or you want, the feelings that you want to feel, write them down. What do you want? Why do you want it even? That too. And what would it take to get what you want? Answer all these questions for yourself. Be real.
So it starts with everything I feel and I believe is rooted in our values.
And we talked about values and especially our values in our culture in the last episode.
What are some of your values, Sana? And maybe you can share some important values with us.
I think really important for me since I was young was freedom to make my own choices, freedom to make choices for my future, freedom to make choices of what I want to do, where I want to go, what I want to eat, like, even those type of little things. Freedom. That was a big one for me. And attention, getting the attention, giving the attention, the type of attention that I give, that's a value. Humility, of being humble with your choices and where you are in life, not showing off. I really hate that. Punctuality as folkway in our Desi culture, and wisdom and honesty, being honest with yourself and with others. And that's also some of these values, I feel like they're turn into taboos in our culture and folkways and mores because some of the things are just not valued in our culture.
They're not important or emphasized, and that's because of our culture is so based on collectivism. It's about community. It's about everyone. It's not about me. And when anyone talks about me, it's almost, hey, you're so selfish. That's not good. And self-care and selfish definitely have a distinction. And our values are based on self-care. And what I learned about the values as I was reflecting and, making a list of what are my values and how important are they to me on a scale of 1 to 10?
Mm-hmm.
How important is love and freedom to me? How important is humility to me? So making a scale of 1 to 10, and then how is it showing up in my life? So this is the part we do for our self-reflection. How is it showing up in my life? How am I acting out on my values? If honesty is one of my key values, and I find myself telling white lies and big lies, guess what? I am not honoring it.
Yeah.
And then, when we have other people, like you're saying that your ex for this conversation, his values and your values were different.
Yes.
And I just want to say that it's important to know that we will have different values, but if your top 5 values, your top 5, like the most important values you have, if they're not respected by your partner or your loved ones, there will be a lot of friction in that relationship because you will never receive the respect you want. So respect and relationships are never one way, right? If I want to receive something, I also need to respect someone else's values. So it's always mutual and it's always reciprocating. And so one thing I do is I see my 5 values. And someone else's top 5 values. Do I respect it? A yes and no, a simple yes and no. If I don't respect it, it'll be really hard to respect something that you disrespect.
Yeah.
That disrespect will constantly show up.
Yeah. That's a great answer to what I was thinking when you were talking about communication, because I was like, I did that. I communicated my values, but he didn't share my values or he gaslighted them. And so what do we do in that situation? And that's what you're saying is that it's not a one-way street. Your values, you have to respect them yourself and realize that, am I actually following this in my own self with them too and myself? And then you have to receive it back too. And if you don't, then there's a problem,
Yeah. Are your values being spoken to? Are you living your values? And how are they showing up? Because if what you're asking for, you're not showing up in,
yeah,
the person you're asking it of is like, hey, you're not doing it yourself. Why are you expecting me to fill that void in you?
Yeah. So that's like a mirror right there. Yeah.
And so it's everything that we are going to go into on this podcast is difficult. It's not easy. But it becomes easier. So we're making difficult conversations easier.
Yes, yeah.
So we can take courageous steps faster. And just through awareness, knowing the values, knowing how they play a role in my life, and knowing how I'm acting on them. And then that triangle now you've got that you can say, okay, so this is why it's not happening. It's not because they're not fulfilling my values. My expectation of them is too big. And I actually have a guided course that I do, a circle of acceptance and how we accept each other. And it just came up like this very second that it's so important to know where people stand in our lives, what we can expect of them, and where we're over expecting and being disappointed constantly.
Wow. Yeah. And courage. It's going to say that courageous steps faster, just courage to start to do this to yourself. And so, Rabia, this is so cool how we started to talk about how you need to reinvent cultural norms. And then we got into the relationships and when you realize and how to deal with them in a relationships. And so we talked about a lot of things today.
Yeah. And, we talked about our threshold and how much can we take and what are the values, living the values, and then showing up in those values so others can show up in those values too. And I think the key word about how to know when to reinvent cultural norms ultimately boils down to one key value that we discussed today, which is respect. How are we respecting and honoring ourselves? And how are we respecting and honoring each other?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is so important. And it boils down to our core values.
Yeah.
Those are the hardest to change. So like I was saying, if I totally disrespect someone
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a part of my core values, I'm going to constantly disrespect them.
So yeah, that inner work and that inner identification, realization, talk to yourself, and that symptoms. Remember we talked about the symptoms. I think that was really important too, to recognize those symptoms as an issue, to talk to yourself, real with yourself, and then to the next steps after that. You recognize your values, communication, and all of that.
So that was a lot to talk about, a lot to learn from, and we'll be dissecting a lot of these individual topics that came up in today's conversation, because I'm sure we can talk easily about just values.
And even each of the symptoms too that we talked about, toxic positivity, gaslighting, each of those symptoms, I think we can talk about easily for 30, 40 minutes.
Exactly. And so I'm looking forward to our next episode where we're going to have Noor Ahmed, and she's going to be talking about some of these mental health relationships and these behaviors that show up in our day-to-day life and how to make it better, because I think that we all want to improve our lives and make it true to ourselves.
Yes, that's what the ultimate goal is, to have better relationships with ourselves and with everyone else around us. I can't wait. Noor is an expert and she's young and she brings a great perspective. So I can't wait to hear from her. It's going to be really awesome to talk to her about all this.
And so this brings us to the end of our episode. We're two Desi girls
reinventing cultural norms
with love. Bye, everybody. See you next time. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Please rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow the Rabia and Sana Show on social medias.
Remember, you can watch the video version on YouTube, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
If you want life coaching services, or you are reinventing cultural norms yourself and think you would be a great guest and want to be on our show, please email us at contact@therabiaandsanashow.com.
And be sure to check out our next episode. See you next time.
See you next time.